Get us. So, are the green buttons lighting up when you plug that in?
No.
No.
That's weird. Now it should.
Yes.
All right, you're live.
So, at 6:38, we can call this meeting to order. I'm serving as Chair Pro Tem. We have a quorum with Commissioner Garrett Ferguson and Commissioner Kate Kennedy. And, Commissioner P. Van Leer, I'm sorry. And so, meeting guidelines, approval of agenda. Do we approve of the agenda?
Do I have an agenda?
Over there.
I need to grab one. Thanks. Oh, me too. So yes, the agenda looks fine to me.
Okay. Do we want to elect a new chair?
I would suggest if you want to be chair pro tem until the committees straighten themselves out.
Okay, makes sense.
If that's good with you.
Yep, I'm good with that. And then,
Should we vote on that? You're good. You
okay,
got my vote.
okay.
Unless you don't
Unanimous
want to vote for
consent.
yourself.
I'm fine. Public comment guidelines. Well, there's no one here for public comment, but if people come, we can move that to the end. And so I guess next on the agenda is the executive director's report.
You guys got the vote out?
You don't have to work today.
I'll just use this because it'll be easiest to see everybody. All right, good evening. So the report basically was a request to update on where we are with grants. So as previously mentioned, right now they're all in some phase of contract execution between the law department, which is one side of the contract, and representative of the city and the CPC, and then the grantee on the other side. So for that process to move forward, a grantee has to complete documents. If they have a board, they have to get a resolution from their board. They have to, if they can't do a disbursement of their fundings through the traditional method, which is spend the money and then ask for reimbursement, they have to request a hardship from us and propose to get their money in advance based on a timeline that they agree to. Most have decided on quarterly advancements. So that being said, a lot of moving parts. This is all being done through email, so that makes it even more logistically challenging. Right now, I think we have 3 contracts that have been signed, which are Cleveland Right Crisis, NEOC, and let's see here. Oh, Cleveland Clergy was yesterday. So that's where we're at. The Cleveland Clergy, the other thing you have to know is what the question was, how do they get their money? So here's where the space we haven't entered into yet, which could come up with its whole new host of things that we're unaware of. And that is once a contract is entered into Advantage, which is the city's financial system, we have to find out who enters that, what the process for that is, right? And then how long does it take before that contract is validated in Advantage? So there'll be like, it has to go to the finance director, director of law, et cetera, et cetera. And then how is it linked to the money? So we're working on figuring that out now. And then for people who have hardships, they have to also send us a request for their first disbursement as part of the contract. So they have to fill out a separate form to ask for their money that we have to put into Advantage, and then a check will be cut.
So do they send the request to us or
Yes,
does it
to
go?
us. So once a contract is in, we manage all the requests for funding because they set us up as a new department this year. So this is the first year we've had access to the city's financial systems ourselves.
And that's what
And
they
independently, that's what Advantage is, yes. So unfortunately, it didn't come with any training or mentoring. So we are learning Advantage at the same time we're trying to do this. So it's a little bit challenging to say the least. But everyone will get their money. It's just a matter of how quickly we can get these things going. So, again, our first year, people have shown us a great deal of grace. They're willing to work with us to get these things going. And that leads to next year. We've learned a lot. One of the major lessons learned is now that we know what is required of a contract, all that will be included in the grant application. So you're going to fill out your grant application like you're getting the award. So that way, if you are chosen to get the award, all the paperwork will be done so we can move to contract really quick this year. So we've learned a tremendous amount. So it's always that way when you start a new program. And hopefully these first contracts that are signed should be getting their money relatively quickly here.
Just a few questions.
Mhm.
What is, or how many grantees have submitted some type of hardship or have expressed that we have a hardship?
The majority, yeah. And part of that is they weren't aware of that. So then we even had one where they had signed the contract and then said, we want to undo our contract and go backwards and redo it with the hardship.
Okay.
Because they figured out afterwards that they don't have the ability to do the disbursement method. So that's another lesson we've learned is this year, we'll make it very clear in the application that the city's default is that you will be reimbursed. If you can't, you have to show your hardship in the application process, right? So you have to submit your financials and say, this is why we can't do that. And that way we'll know right at the start instead of finding out after we've gone through this tremendous contracting process that we need to do that for you. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I didn't know if this had been cleared up because I know from our last full meeting, the community member who talked about the contract being so many pages long and that expenditures had to be spent in 3 days. Like, were we able to get any type of wiggle room around that?
So there's two.
The 3 days and
Yeah.
if the contract is really that long.
So there's a couple of things there. One, city law is very firm that these contracts are already as minimal as they can be, right? So even though I've asked them to consider certain things, their answer has been no. And then they come back with a comparative. They'll say, well, here's another contract, right? So take a look at yours. And for the most part, ours is a little more streamlined. So for a city, ours is kind of streamlined on these comparatively to other city contracts. The other thing is some of these things are legislatively required. It's hard to get an answer from them to show us why each one of these provisions is in here. Where did it come from? And sometimes you get an answer. And don't get me wrong, Stephanie and her contract team have been phenomenal in trying to be responsive to us, right? But the other thing we can't do is be the grantee's attorney, right? So this is where it gets confusing a little bit, right? It's wrong for us to negotiate against ourselves, which we represent the city on this side, right? So what I've told grantees is, just like with any other contract, if you have a problem with a certain provision in this, you need to seek legal counsel and then negotiate on your behalf, right? So you can send a request saying, we don't like this provision, we don't like this language, can this be eliminated? So far, even OC, who came and said that she was going to talk to her board and send back things, has sent back nothing. So at the end of the day, this is a negotiation between the grantee and the law department, with us being an intermediary. And so if a grantee really feels strongly that something in these contracts shouldn't be there, they need to work on their behalf to remove that, right? So we can bring that, we can be their messenger, but what we can't be is their legal counsel and say whether that's good or bad to remove that or recommend it being removed, because that puts us in an awkward place, if that makes any sense.
It does. And so there's no way, I guess, with the days thing there, we could say moving forward for next year, talk to the law department and ask them, can that part be taken out because it's just not conducive to community orgs? But we couldn't do that because we're part of the city.
Because we're part of the city, and the city I already said, had a phone conference about that provision, and they decided they were going to keep it. And it was just me talking about it. It didn't really make sense to me. And, and some grantees had expressed concern, but at the end of the day, the law department decided that they want to keep that in there. And so Martin Belot, who's our new legal representative, next year he'll be doing these contracts. And he is going to try and streamline it as best he can, right? But he's in the same position. He can't eliminate language that city law says is required in city contracts. And that's the difference between doing, I understand, that grantee, the Spread the Love Foundation, their frustration. I hear it. I understand it. But you can't compare us to something like Cleveland Foundation, right? We have council, we have a whole charter and mountains of legislation, and the city, state, their argument is we are doing this to protect taxpayer money, right? So that is their counter. That's why they believe every word is in here, to protect taxpayer dollars. And so that's kind of a little bit hard to push back. And that's why this committee did ask me to pursue, can we outsource these grants, right? To eliminate some of that red tape, because it gets done. City business sometimes can be challenging. And the answer to that is find an intermediary to eliminate some of those challenges sometimes, right? So like a fiscal agent, for example. So in this instance, you had asked me to investigate that, and it is in the hands of our legal counsel right now, and they are going to do an opinion for us on, do we have the ability to outsource this program? But unfortunately, even if we do, the likelihood of us being able to do that, before we need to get these out this year is probably challenging unto itself. So my recommendation is we plan to do it the best we can this year. And if we happen to get one of two things, we also have a request for the $150,000 for a grants administrator and grant software, right? So we may get blessed with that from council. They may decide that that's a worthy thing, but again, we won't have that until later in the year. And when it comes in, it'll be helpful. But this year, we really need to plan to be able to do this faster and more efficiently with our in-house resources that we currently have. And then have a plan B and a plan C. Any other questions?
I just wanted to add that we were hoping, we know that the 3 days it seems fairly unreasonable to give them 3 days to spend their money, but we were hoping that maybe we can negotiate some type of percentage program where grantees will get an installment, and then perhaps once they have spent a certain percentage, around 75% or something, that they could request maybe the next portion. Because my concern is, when you look at the grantees, they're all different. So some of the programs are going to need more money in the beginning, some are going to need a little bit more in the middle, and some are going to need it at the end. So we try, we asked, but they just sort of just turned us down.
And to the chair.
We asked about the installment.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
did.
we did.
And to the chair, I think there's some confusion about what that actually means anyway. So that's why I'm saying, like, these grantees need to talk to legal counsel. They read it, but that may not be what the provision actually means. It could also mean that they have an obligation to pay their vendors within 3 days of receipt. So it was presented in many different iterations in that phone call, and I don't think there was a consensus on what it actually means, but it could mean that if you're dealing with city money, right, and you're under contract to pay someone related to this grant, let's say you are paying somebody to do a presentation for youth, right? What I think this part of this provision means is that you have an obligation when they ask you for payment to remit that payment to them within 3 days, because it's city money. You can't, if you're dealing with other contractual help under your grant, you need to pay your bills on time. That's basically what it means. So I think there's a lot of confusion in what that actually means. And so that's why it's incumbent for grantees to seek their own legal counsel. And if they feel that's something inappropriate, to send back alternate language on their behalf.
So,
Yeah, I had a question about, and you may not be able to answer this, but in terms of that reimbursement piece, would it be even conceivable for us to talk to city council and see if they would sort of waive that and sort of pass a new law related to us that said that we can provide grassroots grants without that? That would.
We did already do that. So they've already agreed to give us that. So we're dispersing ahead of time in quarters.
Okay, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
rather than having the applicants have to go through a hardship process to get a new way to do it just for this process so that we don't have to do that? I mean, is that even worth?
Well, anything's potentially, but I mean, if you're an organization, some of these organizations didn't bulk at it because they already have the operating capital, and that's how they
Right.
deal with a lot of grants in government. So the federal government does it this way. If you get a grant from the feds, you have to show them you spent the money, and then they send you reimbursement. So I think some of these organizations are used to that, so they didn't. Not everyone requested a hardship, and for the ones who did, we could go through and get an exact percentage of how many so far have, but that won't be accurate until we're done, to see who actually, because some people haven't moved that far ahead and some aren't answering our emails, so they may get to a point and say, oh yeah, we need a hardship, so.
So you don't think it's worth asking council?
You could,
Yeah, okay.
yeah, you could.
So there's no date, so
I guess for the people who like are answering your emails and haven't moved the needle at all, we're getting ready to like roll out 2024's grant program. Is there any stipulations on when those grantees need to be back in contact so they can receive that funding?
For this year, so the money's safe. So that's the best way I can describe it. So no matter how long it takes them to get under contract, they can run their program. It's just a matter of us monitoring. We're going to run into having to monitor grants simultaneously because typically, if you were running perfectly by a calendar year, these grantees would be halfway done by the time we start our new awards, right? And they wouldn't start till January. So all we're doing is creating a logjam of having to manage multiple grants that would have been cleared while new ones were coming in. Now in 23 and 24, we're going to be doing disbursements for 2 years simultaneously, which will make it harder on us to manage, monitor, keep track, etc. But as we clear those, if we do end up doing this ourselves indefinitely in the future, hopefully we'll have a grants administrator and hopefully we'll have tracking software. But ideally, as we get better at it, the year before grants should be clearing right at the beginning of the time period where we're entering into new grants, unless they're extensions. But even then, it would be, a new start over, extending a program. So it'll make it a lot less logistically challenging.
Can we put in the application that if you're awarded a grant, you need to contact us within 60 days or something? Like, can we put that
For the hardship part of it,
or any of it?
Yeah.
It just seems weird that we might have outstanding grants for people who aren't answering their phones or emails.
Yeah, and those ones we'll have to make a decision. So at some point we will identify people who just haven't moved ahead or are still having problems and work with them on an individual basis to find what the root of the problem is and decide if we're going to go forward with that or not. Yeah, there may be only 1 or 2 that it looks like qualify for that, that have some problems that just can't seem to be resolved, or they're submitting paperwork and the law department's having a problem with what they're seeing in the paperwork. So, and I don't want to put anyone on Front Street right now, so we'll talk about that. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions or business for the executive director report, or should we move on? We do not. Who have the update on the grant manager? Sorry.
So the only update we have is that we sent an official letter to Mr. Blaine Griffin, President of Council. I think the date on the letter was, it was 2 weeks ago. And Mike Polensik responded. Mr. Griffin did not respond yet. And what it was a formal request to be considered for the $150,000 in this year's budgetary cycle. So they acknowledged receipt, and then Mr. Polensik acknowledged that they will consider the request, but we did not hear back directly from the president of council on it.
All right. And that includes to pay for a grant manager and software.
Correct. So that was, the commission had voted to approve approximately $40,000 is a high-end estimate for software. And then I think it was 110 for salary and benefits of a full-time grant administrator manager. And that position also was conceived to not only manage our grants, but also seek grants for us as a commission to supplement our funding.
All right. Anything else in that section, or we want to move on to CPC grant survey update?
So I've been talking with, emailing back and forth with Commissioner Kennedy. She likes the survey I had. She just wanted me to convert some of the questions from a yes, no to a Likert scale.
For the survey, when will we know it to be sent out? When will it be ready?
I can send it out whenever.
Okay. Has we decided when we will want that sent out, the survey?
I don't believe so. I haven't looked at surveys. I mean,
Oh.
when is, I don't care. I don't know.
Okay, I'll email everybody the.
But I'm asking that question because is there is it about the process or is it about actually, I mean, when does it make sense to send it out? Do we need to wait until they have?
I'll be honest, this will be better when they're all the way done.
Okay.
Okay.
Like when they have
their money.
when they're approved,
Oh,
they start
Yeah.
like in 6 months, not in a year, but
Yeah.
like 6 or 4 months or whatever.
Yeah, once soon enough so that they still remember the process well, but after they've received their money, maybe have a little time to get up and running.
All right. And then I guess the next thing is the 2024 CPC grants program update. I think I saw in the email that you and Commissioner Kennedy had talked to Gunn, or I don't know if we want to start the conversation there. But it looks like that is the bulk of the rest of this conversation. And we can also review the timeline, which is probably going to have to be adjusted, seeing how we now will have vacancies and have to switch some things around.
Yeah, so Commissioner Kennedy, I did have conversations with the Gunn Foundation and the Cleveland Foundation. And basically, they haven't yet, we had good conversations. They haven't yet, they said they would look at we had provided them with the request for proposals and the scoring rubric and sort of asked for suggestions on that. And they said they would do that, but they haven't done that in writing. They haven't gotten it back to us yet. But the conversations were, they were beneficial. I would say that nothing, sort of like, oh, do this, do that. But a number of things came up. Let's see. The one thing the Cleveland Foundation was saying, for their neighborhood safety grant, they have these info sessions, which I know we talked about doing, but they said those were really valuable. It actually turned into more like Q&A sessions. Like people would, they'd make a presentation, but then there'd be a lot of questions just about, do I qualify? What should I do? Like, is this the right issue? And it was very helpful in that sense. They said that they recommended site visits, which I know we've talked about, once the programs are up and running. They compared to I think it was 100 or 150 applications they got in the Neighborhood Safety Fund. And in some ways, their process was similar. They sort of weeded things out at the beginning and said, and you've already talked about this, Jason, that, putting these questions and all the criteria up in the front. So like if they don't fit their criteria, more so than we did. So if they need a hardship, all that stuff to really streamline it, and it might kick some people out if they, if they see that they can't do it, or if they answer in ways that show that they're not eligible. So that was really a lot about what we talked about. One thing that came up was, we talked about Neighborhood Connections and how they are getting a grant. And because we talked about, if, for example, if we don't get the money to hire somebody to manage this program, what about outsourcing it in a different way? I think the Cleveland Foundation isn't particularly interested even in the neighborhood safety grant that they do. But we talked about, for example, Neighborhood Connections. They're getting like $50,000, I think, this time around, and that then they're gonna do their own grant process. And it would be interesting. We just talked about in general, like other organizations who could maybe take that role as well, so we could streamline our process by giving bigger chunks of the money with council approval to places like United Black Fund or Cleveland Votes. We did talk to Cleveland Votes last time, or I did, and they didn't feel ready to do that. I don't know if they would change their minds on that or not, but just the idea of like, that would not only simplify the process for us, but also amplify the reach, because organizations like that have already doing some grant work and they have a lot of connections in the community. Not that we don't, but that might be a way to approach it, might be something that we should think about. But unfortunately, I don't have any like written feedback, like line by line. So that's going to be either we have to wait for that from them, or we should just get started on it. Hopefully, I can nudge them and see when they might have that for us. But that's really the main thing. I hope I wish Mr. Kenny were here so she could, provide some other information. I'm looking at trying to find some notes from my gun foundation, because I wrote my notes in person, on paper, but my gun notes are not written down. So that's what I've got.
Okay.
Wait, no, I do. I found my notes from gun. Sorry. So yes, from gun, it was like first thing. It's a long application. So, and what I just said about reworking to ask questions that would knock people out at the beginning. Like for them, it's like if you don't have the EIN, you're knocked out unless you have a fiscal sponsor, so you have to have that. Put that all stuff at the beginning. Why are you having people hand deliver? Maybe it's better if they come in and they can get help, they can get assistance applying online, because then if you have to hand deliver it, then you have to enter things in. And both foundations talk about this, like the interview process we did seemed unproductive, and I think a lot of us might think that way. But looking at, we had talked about the in-person or the automated program that can, they can go online and answer questions in interviews online. So definitely limiting the interviews would be helpful. Let's see. The woman at the Gun Foundation felt like a program wasn't necessarily what we needed if we're getting 90 proposals. But then, of course, they have staff to deal with a spreadsheet or whatever. So I think she felt like, you need a portal and you just can have something that collects into a spreadsheet. And she said, do something like ask 3 to 5 questions. And if you don't, and we did that a little bit with, what were our questions like, does it fit these 3 categories? And also more information about what those, like better descriptions perhaps of what those categories really are, just to make sure we're clear on that. I think we had a paragraph or so, and maybe that's enough. Maybe we need to look at that too, just to make sure it's really clear. She said they don't rely on a rubric, but really go back to the mission statement. So that's interesting. I think we have to look at, I'm not saying we should get rid of the rubric, but we definitely need to make sure it's aligned to, because I think that's one of the issues we came up with when we were scoring on the rubric wasn't always totally matching the questions we had asked. Streamline it, make it as short as possible. I know we just talked about making it longer in some ways because we want to get that information in at the first. Another interesting idea she had was the Business Volunteers Unlimited, because they have people who are in different places in their careers who might be retired, but they can, for a fairly low amount of money, they can they put these RFPs out there to their volunteers, and they come in and they could help with something like that. So that might be something to look into. I had met Sarah Castle at BVU once, and I emailed her, and she didn't email back, so I'll have to reach back out. But that would be an idea, like a lower cost way, rather than if we don't get the money to hire a grants manager, would there be a possibility of hiring somebody for $10,000 or $20,000 who could just manage that process, at least in the short term, until we come up with a better way to do it like this first time around. So those are like the general ideas. The one I'm most intrigued by is if we could find 3 or 4 organizations that would do the re-granting piece, and they could make an application to us, and we could really have conversations with them and go to city council and say, can we give these organizations whatever, $100,000, $200,000? That's just my idea. I don't know if we want to do that or if everybody would agree with that. So those are that's what came out of that. And again, nothing definitive on, feedback on the rubric and the application. Any questions about any of that? conversations that come out of that.
Good option.
I mean, I'd be happy to have some conversations with some of those organizations and see, but
I think from my perspective, thinking about the 3 to 4 orgs, I want to make sure that some of those are organizations that actually have a mission that's rooted around policing, social justice, racial justice, like something that's really tied to what those 3 pillars are. And like off the back, I'm thinking of, they're not Cleveland, but they are Ohio. They're good orgs like Ohio Transformation Fund, for example, or someone like that. But I'm thinking of, are there social justice type organizations that are more local, have the reach that we could re-grant to? But then also, what would that process really look like for those? And should we still be reviewing? Would we be just giving them the money and saying, you take care of it, you do the re-granting? Or would we still review certain review the applications?
I think there need to be a process of reviewing some kind of application, or at least a really in-depth conversation with them, not just like one person, obviously, but like organizationally, or this committee saying, and us putting together a really clear what we would want them to do and how we'd want them, to handle it within their, like with their structures, and like what our expectations would be and what deliverables would be and how they would report to us. But,
I mean, I think that if we're allowed to outsource, we still have to vote on the grants, right?
To the chair, I don't know the answer to that, so that's why we're getting a legal opinion on what does that mean, right? That is, you do have a duty under 115.5. Does it mean you can outsource that? Can you vote to outsource your voting duty? I don't know.
well,
The other thing is we also have this rolling problem of conflict of interest, right? So we have to address that too. So, there's a couple of things at this point that I would recommend. We already talked about a timeline. From a staff perspective, what I would like to see, if it's okay with y'all, is this a committee, just appoint, right now you're only 3 people, so just appoint one person to be the logistic manager of this right now for 2024's program from this committee, and I will pair them. I am going to task Shalana Williams with being the project coordinator on the staff end, and you take it on a process. The very first thing we need to do is revamp our application and rubric, right? We can worry about other logistical things as we're doing that, but remember, the goal was to have this out there and open in, I think we said April. So that's roughly 60 days we're giving ourselves right now. Okay, May 15th. So add 15 more days, so 75 days. It's still a short window. So I would really like to just have this be task oriented, assign someone from this group to get with Shelley, come back to this group with a revamped application and rubric for consideration, as quickly as possible. So we can at least get this open and figure out how we're going to open it, because you can add if this applications are open for 45 days or 60 days, you still can work while applications are coming in to figure out what your next steps are. But I think right now we really need to look at how are we going to receive things and how are we going to grade them, and so that's an important thing. And Shelley's ready to go with whoever is assigned. We can't assign more than one from this group, but we can assign if the co-chairs wanted, for instance, Co-Chair Adams, if you wanted to be paired up with someone from this group to work with Shelley to do it, with your experience of running it last year, that's feasible because it won't cause a conflict of a quorum of this group. So, but that's my recommendation, is we quickly assign this, and just that way we can work offline and make progress forward.
yeah, I would say that makes sense. One thing about outsourcing is that we did essentially outsource with Neighborhood Connections. We gave them $50,000 and they were going to redistribute it to other grantees. So I think that in some ways that isn't an issue, but the question is like, could we do more than, we'd have to convince city council and talk to them about, can we do more than that for like, not the whole thing perhaps, but more than that to really, reach more people and simplify the process for a lot of grantees, because then they wouldn't, if those larger organizations had to do the paperwork, then they could then put the money out more quickly once they got going with the smaller orgs and wouldn't have to worry about that reimbursement piece. So I think there's a lot of things there that we'd have to talk to city council about, but yeah.
And I think the outsourcing is not a bad idea, but again, we have to take two tracks. Get
Right.
ready for 24, because the outsource at the very minimum will require a vote of the whole commission. You're not guaranteed that even if you come with a good outsource plan, you will get a majority of commissioners agree that that is the right thing to do as a commission. So it could take some time to figure that out. And in the meantime, we need to be ready to go if that doesn't work, right? So we still have to set up a program for this year and assume that we're going to do these this year without the outsourcing option available.
Yeah, I agree with
You
that.
know, so I would say for us right now, the best thing is a multifaceted approach. We're requesting money from city council. We're looking at the outsourcing option, and we're also setting up a program to be ready on time this year, so we don't get caught with what we went through last year, where at the last minute we were struggling to get these things through and out.
So just a couple of thoughts. Going back to the timeline that Commissioner Adams had put together, April 8th was the date that we will want all materials revised, with the finalization date for April 30th. Thinking with those two dates, we have about maybe 45 days. To really get this together. I actually kind of agree with Gun Foundation around the rubric. I think that the rubric did cause a lot of confusion, not in a way of we don't have to necessarily get rid of it completely, but that rubric and some of the language definitely needs to be revised in a way that people can answer and it's not as subjective. I think that the way in which we created the rubric and kind of the application, it was very subjective. So I like the idea of going back to what is the mission and understanding that. I also think we need to include, which will also help us with some of the contract stuff if we don't get what we need from the city, something about a historical landscape of those organizations. Because I know once we started reviewing, there was a lot of strong opinions about certain organizations that some people might have had more knowledge of because they might have heard of them or worked with them in the past. And so also having a partial narrative, they kind of have to explain what is the other work that they have done. Have they done a program like this before, and provide some of those metrics can also help, because if they're a startup organization and they're asking for $50,000, that's a lot of money out the gate just asking for, and they don't have a system set up. Because I think when we think about neighborhood connections, I used to be on a grant making committee. There's a cap to what those community organizations are even getting from them. They're not getting a $50,000 grant. They're getting these small micro grants to put it in the hands of the people to do very small limited projects. And so I think if we want that type of route, we can structure the application to be similar of you have two tracks. Are you a more established organization that has some capital, can really move $50,000 or more? Or are you guys a committed group of 4 to 5 people that are a resident in a Collinwood neighborhood? You guys have this great idea. You've not really that familiar with grant making process, and really you need somebody your cap will be 10,000. I think if we also create tiers, that can help too, so that people are not going for grants that they're not even ready for. And so I think having a 2-part approach to also simplify it with council and with us if we redo the application that way. I know what you guys think.
I mean, I'm open to it. I just think that, we just do a real deep dive into everything just so we can try to make sure we get it right, could improve it. But a concern of mine is always, and I guess it's a capacity thing as well, but I just want to make sure that we do allow grassroots people to have a real opportunity. you know, but there are also, I recognize that for some, there are some limitations, and we're seeing some of that as we're going through the final process with the contract.
Yeah, I think having a part, like a split process a little bit, where it's like, this is more for like the grassroots and they're more micro grants and they can't go over a certain amount, would help with that. And they would be able to get more help and support.
And so you don't have to solve the problem tonight, right? So we just have to choose someone who's gonna be the point person to bring back to this group, working with staff, working with the co-chairs, working with, you can even use the resources that they've tapped into, right? To fix this thing and come back with a solid proposal. If we do this right, we might be able to do it before April 8th. I mean, if we get started now, in the first 30 days, this group may come back next budget and grants meeting a month from now and have something ready to be discussed, right? So that would be ideal. So you have 2 meetings, but you can do this ideally in 1 meeting if we assign someone tonight who's the point person, right? And then from this committee, and I know we're missing Kate Kennedy. Yeah, and she probably would be, but it doesn't mean, so as the committee grows, you can grow who can work on it. But right now you're limited to 1. Otherwise you would have a quorum if you had 2. So just 1 person, assign that person. And then, Dr. Adams, you can jump on it and you guys can have a project kickoff meeting with Shelley within a couple of days and start talking about this stuff and actually, really do the nut and bolts work of it and bring it back. So if anything, at least pick someone tonight, I would hope to be assigned to this. And it can change. You can reestablish people and change them around. So.
Do we want to choose someone, Pete?
Sure.
Yeah, it's just
You want to choose someone?
I choose myself. Like, I gotta.
We can split it up because,
Okay.
for example, if you all want to work on the rubric, then I can reach out to some of these orgs, these potential outsourcing, and see what that looks like to them if they're interested. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
I mean, then we're all doing something. Kate, I don't know what. I'm sure Kate's going to do some stuff too. So.
Yeah.
She volunteers to help.
Okay.
We can do the application. I would. Yeah. We can work on the application. Are you cool with working on the application?
Yeah.
Okay. And Commissioner Kennedy, since we know she wanted rubric starting out, she can work with rubric.
Yeah, you can still reach out to those
Yeah.
groups and just
Follow up with them about
Yeah. I'll
their
reach.
thoughts.
Yeah, definitely.
And then I already started listing stuff that we would need for the pre-screening stuff, so that would be a part of it. I know Shelley had like 3 questions, I think, they were asked this past year for the pre-screening, but we feel like it should be a little bit more extensive now that we know about the hardship stuff, now that we know about all the paperwork and how long we're gonna do it. So I just think there's a little bit of work to do on the pre-screening as well to kind of help that in that space we can also sort of get a head start on potential conflicts with commissioners if we can get the applicants to recognize or explain what type of relationships they may have with commissioners, because we're starting to think about a lot of the things that sort of slowed us down in different parts of the process. So I think that pre-screening is going to be critical, but I've already started a list of things. I went back through all my notes that I had as we were going and meeting, and that should help us as well.
So the pre-screening would, so for example, the conflicts that the city was worried about was like if you're a family member or if you have a financial relationship, right?
Yeah.
So I'm
Or
gonna,
if you personally benefit by like financially or something.
it's that time of year, so I think right now, everyone probably has to redo their conflict forms, so that's typical at the beginning of the year, so I'm gonna reach out to Delonte this week and have him send out, or put us in contact with whoever's managing that. The staff have to do it every year too, we go through that, all city employees do, so we might as well do that now, everyone fill out their conflict forms, early, this year. So then all that we'll need to do is when you receive the applications, if you see something, if something had changed between now and the time we get applications, or you see an order, you just update. The only thing will have to happen is you would have to self-report, oh yeah, I see this, I didn't report it before. But other than that, if you already have one on file, you should be good.
But but still the applicants could also self-report if they know
Yes.
that they know a commissioner. So in previous times where they could have said, well, yes, this commissioner works for me or whatever.
Yes, we did run into a reverse conflict in that way, yes. So this time you will have to, we will make it clear in the application that it's your duty to, recuse yourself as an applicant if you have a conflict with that person, because that was the answer that we came up with, is that the only way we can navigate that is if these organizations have a conflict, they can't apply, because we can't take ourselves out of that in any clean way. So that the only option was to eliminate the org. So they need to know upfront who the commissioners are. So we'll include the commissioners' names in the application, and you will have to, identify your relationship in your grant application to any of these commissioners in that. So that's another thing we've learned.
That's good. So we got that. Is there anything else we want to talk about tonight? As far as what's on here, have we covered everything?
I guess the only thing.
No.
I was gonna say if we divide up the work, I think we should maybe talk about what we should return with next month. Like what
Tangibles?
what clearly it's not gonna be finished next month,
Well, I
right?
think we should have a new draft of the
Okay.
rubric and the application done
Okay.
by next budget and grants meeting. And I think those of us who are taking the lead need to make sure that we reach out to Executive Director Jason this week to make sure that we get a meeting on the calendar with him and Shelley so that we can start moving this along.
So here's what I have. I have, for applications, Commissioner Garrett Ferguson. So it'll, and obviously Dr. Adams, you could flow through all of them, right? Because you have that ability. For the rubric, Commissioner Kennedy, and then for outsourcing Pete. So it'll be, we'll set up a meeting for each one of those and come up with a work plan. And hopefully we'll come back in 30 days and have made significant progress on this.
There was something I was going to say, but then escaped me. Yeah, does it make sense at this point to talk to city council at all, like informally, to say what? Because did we give grants bigger than 50,000? We didn't, did we? So to talk to them about what that might look like, and just to see if, for example, we did outsource at least some of the money, would they be open to that? I know they would still have to vote, obviously, but.
They're going into budget time, so,
Yeah.
we can bring it up when we go before them in budget hearings. I think that might be a good time, but I don't think you'll be able to get on their schedule.
Right.
They just announced publicly their budget retreat, so they're between now and until they approve, that's kind of like their primary focus.
That raises another question for me in terms of the budget. Somebody from this committee, or maybe it'd just be you, John, you all need to go and talk to them at some point.
It probably won't be until March.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wasn't sure when they would.
Yeah, it depends on the year, but we'll know in advance and I'll post it. And actually all commissioners should come to support this initiative. So, the more collective we are and the more politicking we do and the more lobbying we do for this between now and then. So if you have any connections to your personal council people in your ward, I would also encourage you to make your calls, right? You still are a ward member. You should be able to at least get a hold of your council person in your ward and on our behalf, let them know about this grants and that our $150,000 request matters. I think we made some great headway when we went to safety committee, and they did concede that this program is important and that it could probably use some more funding and oversight. So.
Anything else, or? Okay. It doesn't look like anyone has anything else. So if that is true, we will give back 1 hour and 3 minutes. And I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I second that motion.
All right. Anybody in
All in
favor?
favor,
Aye.
say
All right. At 7:28 with 1 hour and 2 minutes to spare, we are adjourned.
All right, lady, we gonna have to work on these